Welcome, everybody. I'm Carolyn Curiel. I'm the Executive Director of the PICC, the Purdue Institute for Civic Communication. I'm glad you're here because we have an extraordinary treat. The national political correspondent for the New York Times is here with us, Jonathan Martin. He'll be introduced in a bit, but I want to introduce you to the individuals who make the PICC what it is, and that is our students. The jobs that are being done to make these events happen, to bring them to a successful preparation and conclusion, it is all student-driven from start to finish, as I think our guest will attest. So I want to name some of our students who are in critical roles today. First, a former student, graduated in December, Christopher Doty. Chris, are you in the room? I don't think he is. I think he's outside. Chris Doty will come in shortly. Our usher for today, who has been coordinating the movements, Haley Sands. The setup and teardown, Kirsten Dolick, Connor Shearer, and Jonathan Goodwin. The roving microphones, we are going to have students on either end of this room so that if you have a question, we need you to speak into the mic. This is a live-streamed event that Purdue will be posting on its main website so that everyone can see it forever and ever. So make those questions really sharp, okay? On our Twitter feed, we have questions that will be selected and read by Frank Speak and Chelsea Spring. We have two moderators today, and I'm going to turn over to them. One other person, Andia. Where are you, Andia? Andia Mansouri has camera duty. You will notice her with it. Don't be shy. She is a talented woman, and I'm sure she will get to you at all of your best angles. Okay, that said, we have two student moderators today. We have with us Gabe Sachs and Cecilia Daizovi. All of these are students of the PICC, and Cecilia, I am turning over to you now to introduce our guest.
Excellent. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cecilia Daizovi, and I'm a junior studying public relations and strategic communication, and I'm also a member of the PICC, as Ambassador Curiel just mentioned. So a special treat today, our guest, Jonathan Martin, is one of the most widely read political correspondents in the nation. He first rose to prominence serving as senior political writer for Politico since the site's launch in 2007. His work has been published in major newspapers such as the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, and he has also appeared on many television and radio shows as a political analyst and commentator. In 2012, Mr. Martin co-authored the New York Times best-selling book, The End of the Line, Obama versus Romney, the final ebook in Politico's 2012 Playbook series. Mr. Martin recently moved to the New York Times, where he is the national political correspondent, where he reports on the most pressing and hot-button issues facing the country. On behalf of Purdue University and the Purdue Institute for Civic Communication, it is my privilege to introduce you to Mr. Jonathan Martin. Please join me in welcoming him today.
Well, Cecilia, thanks for that kind introduction that thankfully was not as long as I feared. I appreciate both your generosity and your brevity. Thank you to Carolyn for having me to PICC. President Daniels is not here, but he's been a very gracious host. And all the students, I had a wonderful tour, a driving tour of the campus. We had originally planned to do a golf cart, but the polar vortex got the best of us. And so we moved to a nice heated van, and where's Jonathan? Jonathan here. Gave me, sorry for the pun, but it was a tour de force. I couldn't resist. I know more now about Purdue history and culture than I would guess some of the actual students here do. And I asked to see the tunnel between the Fidelity House and the chocolate factory. What's it called? Harry's Chocolate? But perhaps we'll save that for after lunch. It's a great campus, and it's my first time here, actually, in West Lafayette at Purdue, and I'm a big sports fan, and I first became familiar with Purdue when I was a kid watching college basketball and college football, and I can recall Mike Allstott and Drew Brees, Chuck Long, even to go back a little bit further, playing there in Ross-Ade Stadium on Saturdays. And I remember seeing that big drum at halftime, and I was like, that looks like a lot of fun. And then in basketball, watching Glenn Robinson for those teams in the 90s. And that's what sort of first put Purdue on the map for me. So it's sort of neat to be here in person. And my condolences on the loss last night. I brought good luck for 44 minutes and 58 seconds. It was the last 2 seconds where my luck ran out, but it was a wonderful game to see. And seeing Glenn Robinson, the elder, watch his alma mater and his son play against each other was kind of neat. I thought what I'd do today is I do some opening remarks, but I always find these events are best for everybody, myself, but also more importantly the audience, when I do more of a Q&A, because I'd like to hear what's on your mind and hear what you're passionate about, and I can respond to that. But let me just talk generally about what's happening in politics and in Washington. And you got the biographical capsule there if you want to hear more about my experience or that sort of thing. I'm happy to indulge you, but I won't belabor that for now. We have a poll in today's paper. Some of you students might not realize this, but we actually still publish a paper that you hold in your hand. Newsprint, dead tree. Ask your parents about it. Although, actually, I was told this morning that records, LPs, are back in style now with college kids. That was new to me. You learn something new on the college campuses every day. We have a poll out today in the paper I spent all of yesterday working on, writing a story about it. And the abbreviated version is that this year looks like to be a really promising year for the Republicans. They're probably going to make gains looking at the early indicators on 2014, but that they have some grave structural issues that they have to deal with, both in terms of policy issues, but also their own coalition. So that's the summary version. Let me expand on that a little bit. If you look at people who are asked about the direction of the country, they say overwhelmingly that the country's heading in the wrong direction. Ask them about President Obama. His approval numbers, according to our poll, are 41%. That's the number of people that approve of President Obama's job performance. 51% disapprove. And if you ask people just generically, which party are you going to support this fall in the election, 3% more people surveyed say that they're going to support Republicans. But if you break that down among independent voters, by a 14% margin, independent voters say that they're going to support Republicans this year. Keep in mind, some of those independents are actually former Republicans who are now calling themselves independents. But the point being that all of those indicators, early yet, but all of those indicators tell us that this is going to be a tough year for Democrats. You combine that with historical precedent, the 6th year of a president's term typically sees his party lose seats in Congress. That's going back to World War II. There have been exceptions to that. I can talk about that if you want. But that is the precedent. And by the way, I'm happy to go through Senate races or governor races with you guys, but I don't want to bog you down right now on the intricacies of the Colorado Senate race, if that's not what you want to hear. The longer-term issue for the two parties is that the Republicans are consumed with some real sharp internal divisions. Some folks in the party want them to be more conservative. Other folks want them to be less conservative. They're more downcast about the future of their own party. They are more apt to say that their candidates are not taking stances on policy issues that they prefer. Democrats, by contrast, are much more unified and supportive of their candidates, are more upbeat about their future, and it's striking. Who in the Republican coalition is especially unhappy? two groups that stuck out to us. Tea Party Republicans, who are typically more conservative, are unhappy with their party, and young Republicans, under 45. Those are the two groups who are most unhappy with their own party. Why are they unhappy? Well, the first group wants the party to be more conservative, and the second group, on some issues, wants the party to be less conservative. So there's lots there to chew over. Now, how does that inform the 2016 primary that's going to be here, frankly, this time next year, if not sooner? In this way, I think. Historically, the Democratic Party was a fractious party that was comprised of competing and oftentimes battling constituencies. They were split over foreign policy, split over culture, split on economics to some degree. There's an old Will Rogers line. It's more of a cliche now than it is a line. But Will Rogers famously once said, I'm not a member of any organized party. I'm a Democrat. And that sort of spoke to what was seen as that part, their tradition. I mean, I can cite past primaries for you that sort of illustrate that. 1968, 2 hours up the road here, you sort of saw what happened to Democrats when they nominated Hubert Humphrey, and there were protests in the street and in the hall. Democrats now have won 5 of the last 6 popular votes in the presidential elections. Since 1992, Democrats have won 5 of the 6 popular electoral votes in the presidential election. They are now effectively the majority party when it comes to presidential elections. That's a reversal of the history before 1992, when the Republicans were effectively the presidential majority party. So Democrats have now become a party that is more unified, and when you get more unified, you're more apt to want to keep control and stay in power. I talked to James Carville, the famous Clinton strategist, last week, and he said, we're in don't screw it up mode. Democrats are acting like Republicans when it comes to politics, right? They are trying to figure out, how do we keep a good thing going? How do we keep the White House? And they have this historical figure who is a household name across the world, who's run for president once, and who is widely beloved in the party. She is the most formidable frontrunner, non-incumbent frontrunner that I can recall in modern American history, at least since Eisenhower. Eisenhower had a primary. So Democrats are doing what the Republicans traditionally did. They're falling in line. Bill Clinton has a great line. He said, Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. Right? Democrats are now acting like the Republicans, rallying around Hillary. She's the candidate. And the big if there is if she runs. Most folks think she will. We can discuss that. But if she runs. The Republicans are acting like the Democrats now. And the Republicans are the fractious, very diverse ideological party. Foreign policy, culture, economics to a lesser degree. They are having what is effectively an identity crisis, right? Are they the Chamber of Commerce party? Are they the Christian Conservative party? Are they a Libertarian party? Are they a hawkish party? Are they a Come Home America party? I mean, you've got groups in their party who are expressing all kinds of different viewpoints. They've had some of these disagreements in the past, but they were never as sharp as they are, I think, today. And that's the difference. And so what's happening on the Republican side is that you've got going into 2016, there's no obvious front runner. Historically, you could always sort of tell who the next guy in line for the Republicans was. It was usually somebody who had run before or who otherwise was sort of anointed as his turn, right? In the party establishment, the big donors and the governors and the members of Congress would fall in line. Well, there is nobody like that this time around because the party is a uncertain party in terms of its identity, and so and given what happened with Chris Christie and the bridge, he was the closest thing that there was to a front runner, even though he is viewed skeptically by some conservatives, and now he obviously has had some problems with the polls. So there's great uncertainty on the Republican side. That's a long way of saying that the parties have flipped their traditional roles, and there's much more drama and uncertainty now on the Republican side than there is the Democratic side. That is, unless Hillary doesn't run, in which then you'll have a wide-open, free-for-all primary on both sides that will hopefully keep me on page one quite a bit. Let me just close my remarks here by talking a little bit broadly about what's happening in Washington and sort of our national political discourse, because I was talking about some of this at breakfast, and I got kind of on a high horse, but I am passionate about. I love history and politics, and it's what I do. It's what I think about all the time, and but some of it's really depressing. There's a reason why the country is so sour right now. There's a reason why the country views Washington with such contempt. And by the way, I should read some poll numbers to you guys to illustrate that. I told you about President Obama's poll numbers. John Boehner, Speaker of the House, 26% approval rating, 26. Among Republicans, his own party, it's only 33%. Congress generally, 13% approval rating. As John McCain likes to joke, that's down to blood relatives and paid staffers. 13%. Eight in 10 Americans say that they are either dissatisfied or angry about the state of the country right now. So people are pretty upset. What's going on? Why is the country so polarized? Why is Washington so dysfunctional? I don't think it's all Washington. I mean, that's sort of an easy target. But I think increasingly you see state governments that are more polarized, too. Indiana, for example, has got a Republican governor, a Republican House and Senate. And you see that sort of red state, blue state model. And by the way, the red state, blue state phraseology used to apply to presidential states. Well, some of the states are red, some of them are blue. But now you can apply that to actual state government, because you've got conservative-leaning states, which are run entirely by Republicans, and you've got liberal-leaning states, which are run entirely by Democrats. And the policies coming out of those states reflect that polarization. And so you've got much more ideologically sharp differences, not just in Washington, but in the states, too. And they're pursuing very different agendas on a variety of issues. And so you've got this country that is increasingly polarized. So it's not just Washington. And frankly, it's not just even state capitals. I think the people in this country are increasingly in their ideological trenches. Why is that? It's a question I think about all the time. And I've read about it, and I don't have all the answers, obviously. It's a very complex issue that you can spend an entire semester talking about in a class. But I do think what has changed in this country is that if you start from the Great Depression and you go through World War II and you go through the post-war period, there was a consensus in America on culture, the media, politics. The country was generally politically in the middle. It would go a shade to the right or shade to the left, but it was generally in the middle. Why was that? There were great unifying events. The Great Depression, World War II, it unified people around something bigger than their own interest and their own lives. These were big existential threats to our lives, and it rallied people. Mass media, there was a unified, a singular media system. People watched the same programs. They watched the same movies. They had a sort of shared outlook based upon that cultural literacy. They read the same books. And putting culture aside, the media was much more consensus-oriented. You had a handful of national papers, including my own. You had 3 news weekly magazines. Ask your parents about those. And you had the 3 networks. And you basically had a handful of people, executives in New York and Washington, D.C., who dictated the sort of country's media consensus. And they were center left, but they were driven by consensus. All that's changed. All that's changed. The media consensus is gone, cultural consensus is gone, and the political consensus is gone, because we don't have those kind of mass rallying events anymore, or at least haven't in some time. And so we're a more fractured, divided country because of, I think those factors are very important. It's not new, by the way. I think we are reverting to an earlier version of the country, a sort of 19th century model when the country was more factionalized and far more polarized. and that era of consensus was perhaps fleeting. I don't want to get carried away that those were the good old days, by the way, because they weren't entirely. There were large segments of the country that were ignored or that were undervalued, and so there have been obviously changes for the best. But when the argument was about whether or not the employees at the factory should get a 2% raise or a 4% raise, you could split the difference and do a compromise, right? Do 3%. When the issues became much more existential, much more culturally divisive, it was harder to find compromise. And also, by the way, when the issues were more domestic and there wasn't the threat of nuclear annihilation, right? You can't discount the amount the Cold War unified people. And so how do we find some kind of common language, some kind of national consensus now that we're in this sort of fractured country? I wish I had the answer. I don't know. But as a journalist who covers politics for a living, who travels the country, it's challenging because if we don't have shared facts and we don't agree on the facts, it's hard to have a conversation. Let's give you one final example of this that makes what we do challenging, and I think is sort of not great for the country. My paper in December did a long, exhaustive investigation of what happened in Benghazi at the U.S. consulate in September of 2012 when our ambassador, Chris Stevens, was killed, and trying to piece together what took place there. It was the kind of reporting, the kind of journalism that, if I can just be a New York Times snob for a minute, very few places besides the New York Times can do. And we put it on page one Sunday, which is still the best real estate in American journalism. And it caused a lot of chatter. And that's fine. What was dispiriting to me was that instead of challenging the reporting or the facts or the merits, people immediately started questioning the motive. And you had voices who said, this is all about whitewashing Hillary's record ahead of 2016. That was a cynical view. The idea that our Cairo bureau chief would go to Libya for weeks and risk his own life. I mean, I cover politics for a living. It's cold outside today, but that's the hardest thing that's been happening to me all day. This guy is in Benghazi and Tripoli and Cairo. He's risking his life to get these facts. The idea that he would risk his life to go report out these facts as part of some cynical effort to help a favored political candidate in an election 2 years from now is preposterous when you think about it. But that's the kind of stuff now that people say. They question motives, and it's poisonous. And I don't know how we fix that. But that is a challenge. And I think, to bring it full circle, I think that's why you see people so angry at Washington or just so disappointed right now, because I think we have lost a sort of national consensus. We've lost an agreement of shared facts, and people now believe what they want to believe, and people don't view their adversaries as adversaries. They view them as enemies, and that's why I think you've got sort of toxic atmosphere right now in the polling that I just read. What's the good news? Good news is that there are idealistic, smart, committed, capable, passionate students like yourself who actually want to go out there and change the world for the better, who think there are causes greater than your own self-interest. And I feel better just being here for a few hours and talking to kids and being outside of Washington and hearing from kids this morning at breakfast about what they want to do. And they all know exactly what they want to do, and that makes me feel better about the country. So on that relatively upbeat note, let me open it up for questions. And again, politics, campaigns, journalism, Washington, whatever, bring it on.
We're going to go first to one of our moderators, Cecilia Daizovi, then to Gabe Sachs. Then we'll open it up. We have Natasha Perez-Rios and Sam Broker on microphones in the aisles. So don't be shy, everybody. We're going to open it up right after these two opening questions.
So as a journalist, you have to kind of battle what I like to refer to, I guess, as the race to be first. So when, as you know, news stations and newspapers want to report the news first, sometimes without regard for facts. So how do you kind of balance that, and how do you deal with that as a political journalist and someone who travels all the time?
You always want to be first in my business because it is a business. It's competitive. This is not altruistic. This is not charity. We want to win. It's a competition. Part of what attracts me to my line of work is the competition. And if you haven't experienced it, there is not much better than having a scoop, right? I mean, it's a really, in my business, it's a really powerful drug. So yeah, I'm passionate about that, and I like to report news first. But what I've also learned is that if you get stuff wrong, people oftentimes remember who got it wrong and who got it first. And I try to remind myself that in a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, unless it's a really big story, transcendent story, not a lot of people are going to remember if you had something first. And especially if it was something that a half an hour later the rest of the world was going to know. Let me use an example. One of the most oddly competitive beats, or not beats, but stories in my business every 4 years is who is going to be the vice presidential nominee? Who is going to be on the ticket? I mean, and we kill trees by the forest full trying to print papers about who's going to be on the ticket. Does it matter? Yeah, of course it matters. Those people can eventually be president. But we compete so hard to break news that the rest of the world's going to know in seconds or minutes or hours, or at the most a day later. And I'm guilty. I pursue it. I'll pursue it again in 2016. But when you look back at that story, you recall who got it wrong. There's a famous front page of the New York Post in 2004. It's Dick Gebhardt. Nope. John Kerry picked John Edwards. It wasn't Dick Gebhardt. I don't even know. Well, actually, that's not true. I probably could tell you because I'm a nerd, but it's hard to recall who actually got the scoop right that year. But most folks in my line of work can't recall who got it wrong. An even more famous example, the picture everybody in this room has seen. Chicago Tribune, Harry S. Truman, front page, Muehlbach Hotel, Kansas City, November 1948. What did the headline say? You all know what it said. It said, Dewey defeats Truman. He didn't defeat Truman. Truman came back overnight and won because of his strength in the farm states. And the Tribune got it wrong. And everybody remembers that. 48, what is that? That's 60-something years ago. So get it right first. Who's next?
Right here. With many names being thrown around for 2016, do you see any potential contenders emerging from the great state of Indiana?
Part of the reason why I love this state is because I spent a lot of time here in 2010 and 2011 in the lead up to the last campaign, because we were all trying to figure out if Governor turned President Daniels was going to run for the White House, the other presidency. And although actually the house he has here isn't bad either, so I like that mailbox is great out front there, the locomotive. And so I spent a lot of time with him, and he had a lot of people across the country who wanted to run, and I think when he didn't run, it was a big disappointment. In fact, I can recall coming to the Capitol in Indianapolis, a cold day like this, January or maybe February of 2011, and sitting down with the governor and talking to him for a while. And for a politician, he was very candid about what he was thinking about. Remember, I left that interview and I thought two things. First of all, I felt like he's probably not going to run. I just sort of had the feeling he wasn't going to run. And the second feeling I had was that the campaign would be deprived of a more candid voice because of that fact. Regardless of his politics, Mitch Daniels is somebody who is far more candid about his views than a lot of politicians are. So I think we've seen that ship sail, unless he wants to leave West Lafayette and give it a go in 2016. But I have a feeling that's not in his cards. Not in the cards. Who's that leave? I don't think Evan Bayh is gonna run again, even though he's got, I think, $10 million in the bank still. Your current governor is interesting. Mike Pence, who was in the House for 12 years and is now governor, I think is somebody who, even though he claimed to be strictly focused on the people of Indiana right now, is somebody who might give it some thought next year. And especially, again, I come back to what I was saying in my monologue that was too long. I'm sorry about that. The party is just so divided right now, and that primary is so fluid. And I think somebody like Pence could give it a look, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And Washington experience, now a governor, conservative, that's what the party is now. Wouldn't surprise me if you give it a look. Who am I forgetting? Am I forgetting anybody else? Indiana politics? I don't think Donnelly or Dan Coates are going to run for president anytime soon. So, okay. Who else? Oh, you want to do?
We're going to go ahead.
Oh, okay. I can hold it. Okay. Hi, Jonathan. Good to see you again. So you said that for the first time in a long time, the Democratic Party is united. But as we see in any presidential primary, the party will become divided over something.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think will be the make or break decider for the primary candidates in 2016 for the Democrats? Do you think it'll be the ACA, or obviously something else will come along and probably be it.
It's a good question. Look, Democrats are more unified now than Republicans are, but that's not to say that there aren't issues that divide them. I think in the past, the country culturally was more of a conservative country, and as the country has moved on culture, Democrats who had to shade their views in the past on culture don't have to do it as much anymore. And that's part of the reason why it's easier to be a sort of unapologetic liberal on culture now, is because 30 years ago, that was dangerous in a lot of parts of the country. It's safer now. Not everywhere, but it's safer in a lot of places. I can cite all kinds of issues for you. The Cold War threat is removed. Democrats were hurt during the Cold War in a lot of ways because they were seen as not as tough as the Republicans were on foreign policy. And that was an internally divisive issue. You had much more hawkish Democrats like Sam Nunn, and you had more liberal, dovish Democrats in the party as well. The Cold War threat's removed. And after 12 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the party is largely united when it comes to foreign intervention. They tend to prefer to avoid it. Where the party does have divisions, I think, is on class issues, on trade, on regulation of banks, and on pensions, public employees, education. There's a sort of strain of powerful cocktail party liberalism that you see especially among cities or states that have a lot of wealthy Democrats, where you've got Democrats who are culturally very liberal, but who are much more prudent or moderate or even conservative leaning when it comes to issues like public pensions, teachers' unions, the banks, those kinds of things. And I think that's where their division is really. Are they going to be the party of Elizabeth Warren, or are they going to be the party of Rahm Emanuel? And again, they don't have the same divisions as Republicans do, but those are there. They have some divisions on foreign policy, not on intervention, but more on issues of surveillance, for example. It's a very strong and ascendant liberal wing that, given the NSA issues, is not happy with President Obama. And you've got more hawkish Democrats who believe that the NSA is doing what they have to do to prevent another attack. On culture, they're remarkably unified now. I mean, just look at some of the votes on guns, on same-sex marriage, on immigration. It's a very different Democratic Party than it was 30 years ago. How's that going to play out in 2016? Two ways to answer that question. The first way is, if Hillary does run, I think it plays out on a much more low-grade scale. She will have to accommodate the liberal ascent in her party in some ways. She'll have to figure out the NSA issue. She'll have to figure out the issue of sort of banks and economic inequality, labor and trade in a way that is probably a touch more to the left from her husband's approach. I mean, Bill Clinton was much more of a moderate Democrat when he ran for president. So it'll be interesting to watch her make that move, and especially given the fact that a lot of her donors are going to be New York bankers. That's her home now. And so how does she accommodate a party that is much more populist than it was in the past, given the fact that a lot of her supporters will come from Wall Street? It'll be fascinating to watch that. If she doesn't run, you'll see a much more vivid demonstration of those kind of divisions playing out. I think you'll see unapologetically liberal candidates run who say the problem with the Affordable Care Act was that we didn't go far enough. And the reason all these problems is because we didn't do single payer, which would have been a lot less messy instead of this system where you're trying to accommodate the market. You'll see candidates who criticize Obama on the NSA, on trade, on the banks. But I think you also see more moderate to liberal Democrats who run in sort of Obama's third term. I mean, a lot of this, in terms of their primary, depends on what kind of a president. Is Obama in 16, Reagan in 88, where George H.W. Bush effectively ran for his third term? A kinder, gentler version, but still basically Reagan's third term. Or is he John McCain, or in a John McCain 08, where you got to run as far as you can from the incumbent president because that's an anvil around your freaking ankle. We don't know yet. I mean, we'll see where. And also, it's complicated because Obama, even though his numbers may be at 41% nationally, he's very popular with the base of the party still, or at least big segments of the base of the party. Anyways, that's a great question. Who else? Yes, sir.
So with the Democratic National Committee being about $15 million in debt, how do you think they're going to approach the midterm election and the 2016 election? Like how are they going to?
Now we're getting in the weeds here. All right. One of the big challenges Democrats have this year is the financial disparity, and the DNC is not in good shape financially. Now, if you look at the Senate and the House campaign committees, they are structurally much more sound. They have more money. The bigger problem, talk to Democrats, and we actually did a story a couple weeks ago that was partly on this, is that there's a deluge of outside money that is largely unregulated that's coming into these states much earlier than usual. Some of it funded by the Koch brothers, other wealthy Republicans who are hitting Democrats really hard, and Democrats are trying to respond, but they can't respond at the same level. And that's really, I talked to Dick Durbin, senator from Illinois, and he said, we can't match them. And so that could be a real challenge for Democrats. And I think Democrats are trying to wake up their base and their donors by saying, look, you guys all want to talk about 2016, but if we sleep on 2014, you could wake up and have a Congress that is entirely Republican. Republicans need 6 seats to take back the Senate. Looking at the map today, it's not a gimme, but it's possible. David Axelrod, President Obama's top counselor, said a couple weeks ago in our story, I can't remember what his quote was exactly, but he said, if Democrats just think that this is all about 2016, they're going to wake up after election day 2014 and see a Republican Senate. That's pretty blunt talk for somebody who is that prominent in Democratic politics. And the goal of being that blunt is to wake up Democratic donors and to try to find some kind of counter to the money that's coming in on the Republican side. Money matters in politics. What's the saying? It's the mother's milk of politics is money. Who else? Yes, sir.
Yes,
you get a bit old for a student here, I think. Are you undergrad?
Media relations.
All right.
For the university.
I'm just kidding.
You were talking about a very bitterly divided society, opponents becoming enemies, and it made me think about. Wanted to ask you, what are the ramifications of having unelected black robes chronically and acutely overruling 51 legislatures, an attorney general who does not enforce certain laws of the land, and a president who vocally says he will circumvent Congress, and at any number of opportunities. And
Yeah.
I guess it occurs to me, it feels like we might be living in the 1850s again and not even know it.
This is one of the complaints I hear all the time from conservatives about President Obama and the courts. And I think it captures what why you see the Republican Party as worked up, as it is about this administration, because they believe that they are pursuing extra legal practices that are not in keeping with the Constitution of the country. We had an interview with Eric Holder on the front page of the paper a couple of days ago. He basically said that the attorney generals who aren't enforcing their gay marriage bans in their states are okay, and that angered a lot of conservatives. I think this is part of the reason why the Republicans are poised to do well this year, is because they're very motivated about what they see in Washington, about what they perceive as the overreach of both the administration and the judiciary, and this is why I think that they have a short-term advantage. What interests me politically is what happens when the grand unifier that is President Obama is gone from the political scene. I mean, what keeps the Republican coalition unified right now is President Obama. He's the best thing that's happening for the party, because they have a common opponent. That may be the same for Hillary when she runs too, but politically speaking, what you're talking about is what is rallying conservatives and what's keeping them together in a fairly fractious coalition. As for the merits of your comment, I'm gonna defer to the people on that, but I can give you sort of a political analysis based upon the question that you asked. So that's my way of dodging.
Okay, next we'll take a question from Twitter. Let's go to Frank Speak.
All right, so the first question we have is a follow-up to Cecilia's and ties in nicely about how you were talking about the shift from print to digital media earlier.
Yeah.
So our question is, does social media doom us to inaccurate breaking stories because accuracy is sacrificed to win the quest to beat all the other media?
Sometimes. Is that no? Yeah, I mean, the advent of the internet has hastened the process all around. News does not happen at 6:30 when one of three newscasters comes on your TV. It doesn't happen the next morning when you walk out to the driveway, Tony Soprano style, to grab your paper. It happens as it happens. It's happening right now. If you guys check your phone, then you're going to find news. I mean, it's real time. Does that lead to a environment where we are in a rush to report what's happening, get stuff wrong more often? Yeah. Look at breaking news events in the last couple of years. There's a lot of stuff that we got wrong in the short term. But the competition to be first is so fierce because everything's happening in real time now. But it's what makes, though, I think, it's what makes people who not only get it right, but it makes people who can also put stuff into context and explain the what, how, and the why of the news even more invaluable. And I think newspapers are doing that. You may know the news, breaking news, federal court strikes down Texas gay marriage ban yesterday. Okay, you know the top line. You're not going to find that out tomorrow. But what newspapers can do is we can tell you why it happened, the context for it, and what it means. And I think it's a really valuable service. Yeah.
Tell the students and our audience generally how it is that you do your job. For example, taking a day like this, when we were walking down the hall, you said you had about 32 emails
Right.
in a very short period of time that it just queued up.
Yeah. Well,
the Times expects you to do what?
A lot of those emails are just press releases that I will delete immediately. Although, I shouldn't say that out loud. I read all the press releases very closely from every office. The job is, first of all, I think I have the best job in journalism. It is as you know, it is a job that is held in a special place of esteem at the New York Times. The people who have had this job before me are giants of political journalism. Some of you might recall the names who had gone before: Rick Burke, Adam Nagurney, E.J. Dionne, Johnny Apple, Tom Wicker, for some of the folks who are a little bit more experienced in this room. And so it's a privilege to have the job that I have. And one of the great parts about it, there's lots of great parts about it, is that they give me time and space. They give me time to write in a way that is thoughtful and that is accurate, but that's also rich and that has context. And they give me space to do that in a paper where space is at a premium. And one of the good parts of the internet is that we're a little bit more flexible now in space. Because, you know, there is no end of the page on the internet. The internet can go forever. So that helps too. And how do I do my job? I have a phone that I check way too often. When I wake up in the morning, well, first of all, I usually wake up in the morning because my wife, who's also a journalist, has her iPhone that close to her face and is telling me that some news that happened overnight, or is just generally waking me up by reading her own phone. And but then I'll grab from the nightstand my phone and see what emails came in overnight and what's happening in the world. And then at night and go to bed, check my phone and then see what's happening in the world and then put it down. And so that's different nowadays. You're always kind of on. You're always kind of on. It's also a reflection of my personality. I really like this stuff a lot. And if you don't, then you shouldn't do what I do. And so it's not a burden. I like seeing what's happening in the world. You know, last night I was at the Purdue game, and my phone died during the game. And I'm going to be the last guy on earth with a BlackBerry, by the way. I still have a BlackBerry. And, you know, went plugged in and charged up and got my fix. What did I miss in the last 2 hours? Does that lead to a more stressful life? Yes. But I don't really know how else I'd do it. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does. One of the things that I've noticed is you're having conversations with a lot of people while you're here. Yeah. And what will you be? Are you gathering a feeling for what's happening away from D.C. while you're here as well?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for asking that question, because besides time and space, one of the great parts about the New York Times is that it is an institution that still treasures reporting, and reporting from outside of my desk in Washington, D.C., from outside of the bubble. You know, talk to real people. And I think it might be actually the best part of the job is to get to travel the country for free and talk to people and eat at local places like the XXX Family Restaurant, where I did that damn peanut butter burger last night. Saw a Purdue game in the Capitol in Indianapolis. It's one of those things where I get paid for this. I mean, so to get paid to travel the country and absorb the culture, and it's not just politics. Politics, obviously, is what I care about, it's what I cover, but it's everything. It's what, you know, what's happening here. The fact that there was that tunnel between the Fidel House and the chocolate. Like, that's the kind of stuff that you can't get sitting in Washington, D.C. Does that matter? No, but it's important. It speaks to a sort of a sense of place. And I think that that's what I try to convey in my journalism, is a sense of place. And the Times pays for folks to travel and do those kinds of stories. Not just here, by the way, over the world. We're opening up bureaus instead of closing bureaus. I was interviewing the governor of Missouri last week in Washington because all the governors in the country were in town. And he was just going on and on about how thrilled he was that the Times had opened up a Kansas City bureau and what that meant to coverage of Missouri. And obviously it meant more attention to him, so he's a politician, he kind of liked that. But it also meant that we had somebody there that sort of understood the culture more because they were living in the state. And I just think the Times is a great treasure and institution because it gives readers that sense of place, and it's not cheap, but I think it's very important, and it's a lot of fun. Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks for coming out, by the way. I like how laid back you are, by the way. I mean, I never imagined someone.
Would you prefer me to stand up at the podium?
No, not at all. I just
like read the teleprompter.
I think it's cool as the students we're all stressed out, to get a job like yours. But when I'm looking at you, you just seem to be pretty laid back.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, we talked a lot about, the differences between maybe the Republican and the Democratic Party and like what unites them and stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess I definitely go more Democratic,
right.
But at the same time, I'm not stupid enough to think that we're the only party that makes sense at times. You know what I mean? Just like there's a lot of things that Democrats get wrong and right. And there's a lot of things that Republicans get wrong and right. But it seems to me like that's an elementary thing that I know. Like most students know that. How come it doesn't seem like when you actually get to Congress that they know that? Like maybe that, we could be wrong.
No, that's a great question.
Like when I'm at dinner with my buddies,
right?
It's just elementary to know that I could be wrong sometimes, they could be wrong, and we work it out, No one goes home just bitter, and so how come?
Yeah. Well, it's an important question. I talked about this morning. We have a system now where the incentives that are geared in reward being more provocative, more partisan, more at times even outlandish, than being substantive, thoughtful, and consensus-oriented. Why is that? Well, part of it goes back to what I was saying earlier. The country's more divided. If you are a member of Congress and you have a House seat, nowadays that House seat is probably very conservative or very liberal. You're a politician, you're about self-preservation, lots of them are. Your instinct is going to be to vote and behave in a fashion that fends off a primary because that district is so overwhelmingly liberal or conservative that that's going to be the only challenge to your political survival. And so you're going to act in a certain way that ensures you don't have a primary. And that means digging deeper in your partisan trench. And so it's structural. But let's be honest, again, it's not just Washington, it's not just the system, although, and by the way, the media is at fault there too. We reward that kind of behavior. It's better clicks and better TV for us. And frankly, I didn't talk about this that much, but the dispassionate, detached media is giving way to a more partisan media that recognizes that there's a pretty good business model in amplifying and reflecting the views of your audience instead of just giving them facts. And by the way, it's cheaper too, a lot cheaper. That's going back, again, that's the 19th century model, right? Papers were partisan. So it's the structure, it's also the country. That's just who we are increasingly now. What changes that? Is it some earth-shattering event? Is it the threat of America, not having the same opportunity that generations have had? I don't know what it is, but I think that's the way it is right now. Sorry to be a downer.
We have time for two more.
Yes, sir. In the red.
Yeah, let's go to Robbie Letta.
In the cranberry, I guess that is, yeah.
If you could go back to any era in history, in U.S. history
Yeah.
specifically, which era would you want to cover for its politics?
Oh, wow. What a great question. My first love was history. And I love history at times as much as politics. And so you've you asked me a question that is right in my comfort zone. I'm really fascinated by the 60s and 70s. I think it was an uncertain time, and everything was being challenged. Everything was changing. I mentioned earlier that I was talking about the era of consensus. It wasn't all hunky dory. A lot of folks in this country weren't treated fairly, and that was all being challenged during that time period. And politically, it meant upheaval in both parties, and the coalitions were constantly changing and fluid, and there were third parties, and there were wings inside the two parties. It was complex and complicated, and there were characters who were rich, Everett Dirksen, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Russell. People were interesting. So I read a lot about that period. I think that period tells us a lot about where we are now. A lot of the good things, a lot of good came out of that period that was reflected today in terms of equality, and a lot of divisions came out of that time period. They're still reflected, today. So I think a lot about that. What else? I think 1912 too, very similar. Right? The country was changing. People were trying to figure out how to address the sort of changing country. Really interesting time. So anyway, that's a great question. Who else? Yes.
So whether, I guess, Hillary runs in 2016 or not, how do you see the 2014 and 2016 elections sort of paving the way for opportunities for women in politics?
That's a good question. I was talking about that era and what it meant for bringing more equality to the country, and I think the women's movement obviously was a huge part of that. I talked to a lot of Democrats last weekend at the National Governors Conference, and many reasons why Hillary's a strong candidate in the Democratic Party, but you can't escape the fact that, as the saying goes, nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. There's a lot of Democrats, the time has come for a female president. It's 2014 and 2016. We made history in 2008, the first African-American president. A lot of Democrats really want to make history again and elect the first female president. It's a very powerful force inside that party. And what will that mean? I think it show more girls that there's not jobs that are off limits to them. So it matters in that context. What's fun to think about, because I'm a political junkie, is the role of Bill Clinton. And because not only will we have a precedent being shattered with Hillary Clinton, we haven't had a first gentleman, and we haven't had a first gentleman who was a former president himself. And so, as someone who does this stuff for a living, the possibilities there are just so rich for me. And but at the same time, the Clintons are going to have to contend with this idea that while we're going forward and making history, we're also going back too. The Republicans will say this. One of the first stories I did at the Times was about, part of the challenge that she'll have is we don't do this in this country. We don't elect people who are older after presidents who came before who are that much older. It just does not happen. We typically, every president is younger and younger. We turn the page. And so at once we're, making this great change, but at the same time it's also in some ways reverting back to a previous era. And, you'll hear a lot about that. And it's not just the pure chronological. It's also the fact that the country will have to come to terms with whether or not it wants to put folks back in office who have their admirers, but also a lot of detractors and some folks around them who aren't viewed with a lot of love. And you'll see that. And part of the reason why Obama got the nomination, by the way, in 2008, was because he was somebody who said Clintons and Gingrich and Bush and all of that baby boomers drama, as one writer put it, goodbye to all that, right? I represent an emphatic break from the baby boomer drama of all those people that you've been dealing with America for the last 20 years. And that was a really compelling message. And she'll have to figure out how to respond by saying, this is not going back to that. And that's going to be fascinating to watch, too. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's first thank all of you for coming today and being part of this forum. I want to thank all of our students. Students who participated, please stand. PICC students. Let's give them a hand. Let's also thank President Daniels, who made this visit possible by connecting us with Jonathan Martin. And we have a presentation to thank you, Jonathan, for your visit here.
Well, can I just say real fast, thank you for your great questions and, more importantly, your hospitality. The weather was cold, but the Hoosier or Boilermaker hospitality was warm. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Jonathan.
Appreciate
On behalf
it.
of Purdue Institute, our Civic Communication.
Thank you.
With
Very
this.
kind of you. Thanks so much. And by the way, if you want to get a hold of me, you can ask Carolyn, and feel free to questions or critiques or anything else you want. Thank you.
Well, we're not going to let you get away without looking at the contents and then modeling
Uh-oh.
what's inside. And then
Did they get one of those
PICC
sledgehammers
students,
the mascot has?
PICC students stand by. We're going to take a group photo.
Oh, yeah. Oh, nice. Brian Lamb School. There we go. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.